Alrighty, welcome to the Alter the Brood podcast. The name is Paul, also known as MTG Anonymous on Twitter, YouTube, MTG Goldfish, and Discord, and also Patreon. But today we are going to be going over, relative Spike Tribal, and then also we're going to be having new music on the channel from now on, so feel free to take a listen. Alright, that was On My Way by Ghost Rifter. If you would, please check them out on SoundCloud, I think. Yeah, on SoundCloud. This song is from freestockmusic.com, and, it's got Creative Commons, so that's probably going to be the intro song for a while. I really like it. It sounds pretty interesting. But without further ado, let's get into the deck list. So today we are doing basically a Spike Tribal deck with Renata Called to the Hunt as the commander. Renata Called to the Hunt is 2, a green for the legendary enchantment creature demigod. Her power is equal to your devotion to green, which anytime you have a green mana symbol on a permanent, that means that that's a devotion to that color. So, and then each other creature you control enters the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter on it. If you don't know spikes, they all have +1/+1 counters on them, and then you pay a certain amount of mana for them to do an ability. We have 23 creatures, not including the commander, 13 spells, 16 artifacts, 13 enchantments, and 34 lands. Now we have one less than usual for lands because this is green, and mono green can do a lot of ramping, and it does it relatively well. Well, not relative, it's the best in any of the colors to do green. So let's go over the creatures first. First off, we have Spike Drone. For 1 green, you get a Summon Spike, or the errata text is a Spike creature. Spike Drone enters the battlefield with 1 +1/+1 counter on it, and then pay 2, remove a +1/+1 counter from Spike Drone, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. So what ends up happening is Renata, if we have her out already, it comes in with 2 +1/+1 counters on it, so that means we can use its effect 2 times. Now granted, we're probably not going to want to since we want bodies on the battlefield, but it's pretty interesting. Next off, we have the Bramblewood Paragon. This is basically one of those creatures that likes +1/+1 counters on it. For 1 in a green, you get a creature elf warrior. It's a 2/2. Each other warrior creature you control comes into play with an additional +1/+1 counter on it, which we don't really care. I don't think there are any warriors now that I think about it. Yeah, I don't think there's any warriors. We'll go over that. We'll come back to it if that happens. But each creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it has trample. So now since Renata gives every creature that enters a +1/+1 counter on it, so now each one of them is going to have trample. Now granted, there aren't as many ways to have extra power in this deck, but each one of the spikes has the ability to remove a +1/+1 counter from it and put it on something else. So what we would do is we'd remove the counter from one of them and put it on the biggest one. So basically, Bramblewood Paragon is going to probably be one of our ending pieces. Next off, we have Pollen Bright Druid. Since all of our creatures are going to enter with a +1/+1 counter on it, what we're going to want to do is use the Proliferate ability. So for 1 in a green, Pollen Bright Druid is a creature elf druid with 1/1, and when it enters the battlefield, choose 1. Either put a +1/+1 counter on target creature or proliferate. And then for proliferation, choose any number of permanents and or players, then give each another counter of each kind they already have. So basically, since all our spikes are going to have +1/+1 counters on it, when we proliferate, it'll give each of our spikes an additional +1/+1 counter on them. And then from there, we can use those +1/+1 counters on them and move them to other places. Next off is Primal Druid. For 1 in a green, you get a 0/3 creature human druid. When it dies, you may search your library for a basic land card, put it onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle your library. So we don't really care about +1/+1 counters on our creatures that aren't spikes, but basically what this one's going to do is we're just going to have it in the way. When it dies, we get to search for a forest, put it on the battlefield. So it's basically just a ramp piece. And then also, because it's only 1 and a green, we don't want to play our spikes before we get Renata out, so we'll have Primal Druid as an early blocker. Next off is Evolution Stage. Like I said, we need Proliferation, so this is going to do that. For 2 and a green, you get a Creature Elf Druid. It's a 3/2. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, proliferate. Since green has many ways to search out lands, what ends up happening is once we get Evolution Stage out, we're going to want to use a search card, put lands on the battlefield every turn extra, and then we'll just make all of our spikes huge. Use Bramblewood Paragon to swing out and kill our opponents. Next off, we have Fertilid. For 2 and a green, you get a 0/0 creature elemental. Fertilid enters the battlefield with 2 +1/+1 counters on it, and then pay 1 and a green, remove a +1/+1 counter from it. Target player searches his or her library for a basic land card, puts it into play tapped, then that player shuffles his or her library. So basically what ends up happening with this is with any way to proliferate, we'll basically just have a way to get a land from our graveyard from our library every turn, and then basically we just have a ramp spell. We have a rampant growth every turn. So with Evolution Stage, what ends up happening, which I keep saying, so I'm going to try to not say that multiple times, but what happens is we put that land on the battlefield tapped, and then Evolution Stage triggers, and then we give Fertilid another +1/+1 counter on it. So basically, we'll just keep going over and over again with this ramp until either A, we run out of mana on the end of our opponent's turns, or, well, we just stop doing it. Spike Feeder is next. For 1 a green and a green, you get a Summon Spike, or a Spike creature. It's a 0/0. It comes into play with 2 +1/+1 counters on it, and then for pay 2, remove a +1/+1 counter from it, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature, or you can remove a +1/+1 counter from it and gain 2 life. So as we're doing the proliferation effects with Evolution Stage and Fertilid, we can remove a +1/+1 counter from Spike Feeder and gain 2 life, and then we can do that every single time we proliferate. Basically, as long as it has 1 +1/+1 counter on it, we're safe. Spike Rogue is next. For 1 a green and a green, you get a 0/0 Summon Spike. It comes in the battlefield with 2 +1/+1 counters on it. You can pay 2 and remove a +1/+1 counter from it and put a +1/+1 counter on target creature, or you can pay 2 and remove a +1/+1 counter from another creature and put it on the Spike Rogue. So this makes it so that we can take basically +1/+1 counters away from the Pollen Bright Druid if somehow it got one. The Evolution Sage, the Primal Druid don't need +1/+1 counters on them. And then we can take them off of Renata if somehow she got them. Basically, it's just to move the +1/+1 counters somewhere, so that way we'll be able to use them somewhere else. Next is the Spike Worker. For 2 and a green, it enters with 2 +1/+1 counters on it. Well, it's a Summon Spike. And then pay 2, remove a +1/+1 counter from it, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. So as you see, we just keep putting +1/+1 counters on creatures every single chance we get, basically. Yorvo is next. For green, a green, a green, you get a 0/0 legendary creature, Giant Noble. Yorvo, Lord of Garenbrig, enters the battlefield with 4 +1/+1 counters on it. With Renata out, it'll be 5. And then whenever a green creature enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on Yorvo. Then if that creature's power is greater than Yorvo's power, put another +1/+1 counter on it. So this is another one of our finishing pieces. Since we're in mono green, all of our creatures are green. And so what will happen is we'll make Yorvo super big, get the Bramblewood Paragon out, and swing to try to kill our opponents. Basically, the other thing we can do is use our spikes to move +1/+1 counters over to Yorvo, and then that just makes it even better. Armorcraft Judge for 3 and a green. You get it's a 3/3 creature, Elf Artificer. When it enters the battlefield, draw a card for each creature you control, +1/+1 counter on it. So 4 mana for a draw spell for every creature we control, basically, because that's essentially what's going to happen. The only creatures so far that don't enter with their own +1/+1 counters are the Bramblewood Paragon, the Pollen Bright Druid, the Primal Druid, the Evolution Sage, and then everything else so far has entered with a +1/+1 counter on it. So if we can just continuously get cards out, especially if we can play Renata first before we play the Armorcraft Judge, we basically just draw a whole bunch of cards. And then since this is an the battlefield effect, we can keep taking advantage of it every turn with a certain artifact. Karametra's Acolyte for 3 and a green. You get a 1/4 creature human druid. Tap, add an amount of green to your mana pool where it is equal to your devotion to green. So all of these creatures all have a lot of green in them, seeing as there are no colorless creatures in this deck. They're all green, and then there are a lot of enchantments, and they also all have green in them. So basically, we're going to be able to tap for a lot of devotion every turn, and so that just makes it so that we can play even more creatures pretty much every turn. Next off, we have more spikes. Spike Breeder for 3 and a green. You get a 0/0 summon Spike. Spike Breeder comes into play with 3 +1/+1 counters on it, so we're a little bigger, so that's why it costs more mana. And then for 2, you can remove it as all the other ones do. You can remove a +1/+1 counter from Spike Breeder, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature, or you can pay 2, remove a +1/+1 counter from it, and put a Spike token into play, and then that Spike token is a 1/1 creature. So I like this card because now, instead of having to swing big, we can swing wide. Every turn, we just keep making another spike token, and then we'll just slowly move counters over to them, and then use our proliferate effects to make them bigger, and then every turn, we're just going to basically make something even bigger. We're trying to basically just out-tempo our opponents. And then since this deck has a lot of mana sinks, the Karametra Acolyte is really important for this deck. Next off is Spike Soldier for 2, a green and a green. You get a 0/0 summon Spike. It comes into play with 3 +1/+1 counters on it. Again, explains the mana cost of 4 instead of 2 or 3. And then you can do the normal 2, remove a +1/+1 counter from Spike Soldier, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature, or you can remove a +1/+1 counter from it and give it +2/+2 until end of turn. So basically, you're losing 1 to gain 2, but you don't get that 1 back. So we can swing, use a battle trick of having Fertilid keep grabbing lands out of our library, put them on the battlefield, proliferate Spike Soldier bigger and bigger, remove those +1/+1 counters on it, and we could probably kill an opponent. Next off is Spike Weaver for 2, a green and a green. You get a 0/0 summon Spike. It enters with 3 +1/+1 counters on it. It can do its normal ability, or for 1, remove a +1/+1 counter. Creatures deal no combat damage this turn. Now with Proliferate, this is amazing, as we can just keep +1/+1, removing a +1/+1 counter for each turn from our creature, from Spike Weaver, and then we can prevent our opponents from basically killing us with creature damage. Now, the great thing about this is we can, Renata enters, it gets 1 additional, so it enters with 4, and then we can use that on each of our opponent's turns if they swing at us, and if they don't, then it saves +1/+1 counters on it, and then as we proliferate, that means we have even more fog effects. So, it's amazing. Plague Maw Beast for 3, a green and a green. You get a 4/3 creature beast. Tap, sacrifice a creature, proliferate. Now, this is extremely important in this deck. Now, remember, I told you I have Spike Breeder, which you pay 2, remove a +1/+1 counter from Spike Breeder, and then you put a Spike token into play. Now, with Plague Maw, I can sacrifice that Spike creature that I made, and then I can proliferate. So I give every single creature that I have another +1/+1 counter on it. So the way this works is every turn I make a breeder, I sacrifice one of the tokens, and then make everything bigger. And so Spike Breeder didn't actually lose any power. But unfortunately, it does tap the Plague Maw Beast, so there's a 4/3 you don't get to block with, but it's still relatively helpful. Spike Colony is next for 4 and a green. You get a 0/0 summon Spike. Spike Colony enters with 4 +1/+1 counters on it, and then it has the normal ability, remove a +1/+1 counter from it, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. So 5 mana for a 4/4, or with Renata, it's a 5/5. It's pretty worth it. Next is Spike Tiller for 3, a green and a green. You get a 0/0 creature Spike. Spike Tiller comes into play with 3 +1/+1 counters on it. Pay 2, do the normal thing, or you can pay 2, remove a +1/+1 counter from it, and then target land becomes a 2/2 creature that's still a land, put a +1/+1 counter on it. Now, this is also important, as we can make our lands bigger, or we can make our opponent's lands into creatures during board wipe situations and kill them. Now, a lot of people don't agree with mass creature removal, but I like it, so I would still do it. Next off is Primordial Sage for 4 green and a green. You get a 4/5 creature spirit. Whenever you play a creature spell, you may draw a card. Now we have 23 creature spells, but more than likely that won't be the case once we play Primordial Sage. But it's still a good card. We get to draw a card every time we play a creature. Now we can make lots of mana, so we can just keep doing this over and over again. It helps us out a lot. Next is Beamstalk Giant for 6 and a green. You get a creature giant with star, and its power and toughness are equal to the number of lands you control. But there's also the Sorcery Adventurer Fertle's Footsteps for 2 and a green. Search your library for a basic land card, put it onto the battlefield. It does not say tapped, and then shuffle your library. So basically, we're paying 2 mana for a land, getting a land onto play. Now we're paying 3, but we can use that land to tap, so it would be the same thing as paying 3 for a tapped land, or paying 2 for a tapped land. Next off is Protein Hulk. Now, there's no flash since there's no blue, but Protein Hulk is an extremely important card in this deck. For 5, a green and a green, you get a creature beast 6/6. When Protein Hulk is put into the graveyard from play, search your library for any number of creature cards with the total converted mana cost of 6 or less, and put them into play, then shuffle your library. So what we can do is we can grab Spike Drone, Yorvo are the most important 2, and then pick a 2/2. So Bramblewood Paragon to end the game, or Pollen Bright Druid, or Primal Druid. You can also grab Evolution Sage, since that's how we're going to proliferate most of the time. You could just only grab, the Primordial Sage, so that way we can play cards every turn. You could grab the Spike Colony. The Plague Maw Beast is an important one, and then you'd have one left over, so you could grab the Spike Drone. Basically, you want to hope that you don't get the Spike Drone early, so that way when Protein Hulk dies, because it will die, then you'll be able to go get it out, and so you can maximize how much mana you use. Next is Spike Hatcher for 6 and a green. You get a 0/0 Spike. Spike Hatcher enters the battlefield with 6 +1/+1 counters on it, and then pay 2, do the normal Spike thing, or you can pay 1, remove a +1/+1 counter from it, and then regenerate it. So we're basically just going to keep being able to regenerate Spike Hatcher, and it makes sense. Patron of Orchi is the last creature in the deck. For 6, a green and a green, you get a 7/7 legendary creature. A legendary creature spirit. It has Snake Offering. You may play this card anytime. You could play an instant by sacrificing a snake and paying the difference in mana between these cards. Mana cost includes color. Now, we do not have any snakes, so that doesn't work. So we'll only be able to play it at sorcery speed. But its ability is tap, untap all forest and all green creatures. Play this ability only once each turn. So now, once we've made lots of mana, or gotten lots of lands out of our deck, we can tap, untap them all, and all green creatures. Now, this includes the Patron of Orchi, so you can do this every single turn, and your opponents will notice. They always do, and they always try to kill it as fast as possible. But it's amazing. So every turn, we can do something like get as many lands out with Fertile as possible. Our opponent's upkeep, we tap Patron of Orchi, untap all our forests and all our green creatures, which is all of our creatures, and then we do the Fertilid thing again, where we keep going and getting lands, especially if we have Fertilid Evolution Sage together, and then keep getting lands, and then at our next opponent's upkeep, tap Patron of Orchi, untap all our lands, so it's basically a combo. Now, we can use it to pull every single land out of our deck, but that turns off Evolution Sage, so we wouldn't want to do that, but we'll do 1 or 2 each turn. Next, there are 13 spells. Rampant Growth is the first one. For 1 and a green, you get a sorcery. Search your library for a basic land card, which is basically saying search your library for a forest. Put it onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle your library. Cultivate is basically the same for 2 and a green, except you search for 2 basic land cards. You put 1 on the battlefield, tapped, and then put the other in your hand. Again, you're going to shuffle your library. Far Wanderings is next. For 2 and a green, search your library for a basic land card and put that card into play tapped, then shuffle your library. Then there's Threshold. Instead, search your library for 3 basic land cards and put them into play tapped, then shuffle your library. You have Threshold if you have 7 or more cards in your graveyard. Now, I don't know if that's going to work, or if that's possible, but preferably it is. And then it's not different types, so you can basically just have 7 cards in your graveyard, which would more than likely be creatures. Grow from Ashes for 200 green with Kicker 2. Search your library for your basic land card, put it on the battlefield tapped, then shuffle your library. If it was kicked, search for 2 basic land cards and put them on the battlefield not tapped. So, for 5, you get 2 basic land cards untapped. Harvest Season for 200 green. Sorcery. Search your library for X basic land cards, where X is the number of creatures tapped creatures you control. Put those cards onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle your library. Now, we have ways to tap all our creatures before we use Harvest Season, and then Patron of Orchi is going to make this even better, because we can tap all our creatures to make mana, and then use Harvest Season to search for a whole bunch of basics, then untap everything with Patron of Orchi. So that's the combo, how that combo works. Kadama's Reach for 200 green. Search your library for 2 basic land cards. Reveal them both. Put one into play, put the other in your hand. So basically we're wanting to make each land drop each turn, and if we can't, then we have the Fertilid for that. Search for Tomorrow for 200 green. Search your library for a basic land card, put it on the battlefield, then shuffle your library, or you can spend 2 for green. And then if you do that, instead you'd exile it with 2 time counters on it. At the beginning of your upkeep, remove a time counter on it. When the last one's removed, cast it without paying its mana cost. So we can do this turn 1 if we haven't. And it would be a really important turn 1 play. There's only one better turn 1 play that I could say, but you know what it is. It's in the title of the podcast, so I won't go over it till we get to it. Spoils of Victory is next for 200 green. Search your library for a Plains, Island, Swamp, Mountain, or Forest card. Put that card on the battlefield, then shuffle your library. So this basically says search your library for a forest. Now, this is good for if you have duels, but this is a monocolored deck. But it is definitely an important card, and it only costs 0.02 ticks. So it's good for multicolored decks, basically. Circuitous Route for 3 and a green. Sorcery. Search your library for up to 2 basic land cards and or gate cards. Put them on the battlefield tapped, then shuffle your library. As you see, we're just trying to grab as many lands as we can, as fast as we can. Explosive Vegetation also does that for 3 and a green. Search your library for up to 2 basic land cards. Put them on the battlefield tapped, then shuffle your library. So they basically are the same card. Explosive Vegetation, for some reason, is 0.03 ticks more, but regardless. Reap and Sow for 3 and a green. Sorcery. Choose 1, destroy target land, or search your library for a land card. Put that battle card on the battlefield, then shuffle your library, or you can entwine for 1 and a green. So what we'll do is we'll entwine, because it's 6, why not? We go grab Karn's Bastion, since that's our only basic land card, and then we put it on to play. So now we have a Proliferate engine, but we'll get over that. We'll go to that when we get to the lands, and then we get to destroy a target land. So if any of our opponents have something that we don't like, we destroy the land. Hour of Promise for 4 and a green. Sorcery. Search your library for up to 2 land cards, put them onto the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle your library. If you control 3 or more deserts, create 2 black zombie creatures. We don't have deserts, so that last part doesn't apply, but we can get 2 lands, so Karn's Bastion and a forest, and then we get to play them. They enter tapped, but it's still 2 lands. Boundless Realms is the last one for 6 and a green. Search your library for up to X basic land cards, where X is the number of lands you control. Put them onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle your library. We can get to 7 mana really fast, and then hopefully all that mana is from lands, and then we get to search for 7 basic land cards. Now, with Patron of Orchi out again, you untap all those lands, and you get all that mana back. So, Patron of Orchi, I would think, would be a really important card for green decks. It's only 8 mana. You can easily make 8 mana by turn 8, or by turn 4, so. Altar of the Brood is next for 1. You know what it does, but I'm going to say it anyway. Whenever another permanent enters the battlefield under your control, each opponent puts the top card of his or her library into his or her graveyard. So, yeah, you know what I'm doing with that. We're going to make as many creatures as we can with the Spike Breeder, and we're going to try to mill our opponents out. Now, will it work? I don't know, but we'll try. Animation Module for 1. It's an artifact. Whenever 1 or more +1/+1 counters are placed on a permanent you control, you may pay 1. If you do, create a 1/1 colorless servo creature token. So, you know what we're doing with this. Every time one of our creatures enters, because Renata gives them a +1/+1 counter on it, we pay 1, we get an additional servo. Now, let me see. Renata does not say... So we just found a combo. It does not say non-creature non-token creature. Each other creature you control enters the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter on it. So once you trigger animation module, you pay the 1, the servo enters. Now, Renata sees that, gives that servo a +1/+1 counter on it, and then you can do it again, and you can do it again, and you can do it again. So we just keep going over and over and over again. So now we're making pretty much endless 1/1 servo tokens. Now, we don't have a way to give haste. I overlooked that when I was doing the deck. So if we had a way to give haste, then we could just swing out with 2/2 servo tokens, but we're not going to do that. And then also, these are also subject to proliferate since they're entering with +1/+1 counter on them. So we're just going to go for more lands and keep going and going and going until we can't do that anymore. Contagion class for 2, it's an artifact. When it enters the battlefield, put a -1/-1 counter on target creature. And then for 4 tap, proliferate. We've already gone over what proliferate does, so we put a -1/-1 counter on a target creature, preferably an enchantment creature like a god, because they are immune to, well, most removal. And then every time we just keep giving more -1/-1 counters, and then that'll keep their gods from wanting to be creatures, so it helps us out a lot. Illusionist Bracers for 2, whenever an ability of an equipped creature is activated. If it isn't a mana ability, copy that ability. You may choose new targets for the copy. Now, this is going to go on the Spike Feeder or the Spike Breeder. See, so now whenever we remove a +1/+1 counter on it from Spike Breeder, we make 2 tokens instead of 1. So it just helps us out a little bit. We could also put it on the Plague Maw Beast, so now whenever we sack a creature, we proliferate twice, so that gives multiple +1/+1 counters on it. It just depends on how you want to do it. Next off, Strionic Resonator for 2. You get an artifact, pay 2, tap, copy target triggered ability you control. You may choose new targets for the copy. Now we have a couple triggered abilities that we can choose from, like Ronus Monument, but we don't actually need that, but it comes into play after a while. So I'm pretty sure you can use the Strionic Resonator to copy whenever a creature enters the battlefield. Well, actually, I don't know. They enter the battlefield with those +1/+1 counters on it. But you can trigger Renata, I'm assuming. I gotta look that up. There was a reason I had Strionic Resonator in here, but I don't remember. Next is Throne of Geth for 2. It's an artifact. Tap, sacrifice an artifact, proliferate. So those tokens we're making from the animation module, we can tap, sacrifice those, and proliferate. Altar of the Pantheon, since we have Renata, why not? It's 3, and then artifact. Your devotion to each color and each combination of colors is increased by 1. So if we don't have anything out, then we have a devotion of 1 green. This also helps with Karametra's Acolyte, since it cares about devotion as well. And then tap, add 1 mana of any color. If you control a god, demigod, or legendary enchantment, you gain 1 life. Now, Renata, I think, is our only legendary enchantment. I'm going to double check. Yes, it is our only legendary enchantment. So the only thing that can trigger this is Renata, but regardless, we basically just want to gain that 1 life. It just helps us out a little bit. And while we're gaining that 1 life, we're also losing 1 life with Cryptolith Fragment. It's an artifact for 3. It enters the battlefield tapped, and then tap, add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. Each player loses 1 life. So Altar of the Pantheon and Cryptolith Fragment, our opponents lose 1 life, and we gain none. So, and then at the beginning of your upkeep, if each player has 10 or less life, transform Cryptolith Fragment into Aurora of Emrakul. It's a 1/4 creature, Eldrazi Reflection with Flying and Death Touch. Whenever it attacks, each opponent loses 3 life. So now, instead of losing 1 life whenever we tap it, each opponent loses 3 life. So if we're all at 10, that's pretty scary, seeing that's about a third of their life, but next off is Heartstone for 3. It's an artifact. The cost of each creature ability requiring activation cost 1 less. This cannot reduce an ability's generic mana cost to less than 1. So now all of our spikes only cost 1 mana to remove the +1/+1 counter on it, or the Fertile it only costs a green. So we want to get this out early, and then if we have Patron of Orchi, like I said, we just want to kind of keep doing this over and over again. Illusionist Bracers can also go on Patron of Orochi. I forgot about that. Next off is Ronus's Monument. For 3, you get a legendary artifact. Green creature spells you cast cost 1 less to cast, so every single one except for Yorvo gains from this. Whenever you cast a creature spell, target creature you control gets +2/+2 and gains trample until end of turn. This we're going to care about if Yorvo's out, because we can play a whole bunch of creatures at one time. Give that +2/+2 to Yorvo. It gets +1/+1 from each one of the creatures entering the battlefield. So Yorvo gets big, we swing, try to kill our opponent. Rings of Bright Hearth are next. For 3 artifact, whenever you play an activated ability, if it isn't a mana ability, you may pay 2. If you do copy that ability, you may choose new targets for the copy. So the most important one for that is Patron of Orochi again. Once we tap it, since we activated the ability, we can pay 2, copy it. So now each of our green permanents and forests untap twice. So untap, tap all of them for mana, untap them again. Nyx Lotus, you know what it does. For 4, it's a legendary artifact. Nyx Lotus enters the battlefield tapped, and then tap, choose a color, add an amount of mana equal to your devotion to that color. So we're going to choose green, obviously, with Altar of the Pantheon. That gives us 1. Renata has 2 already, so that would be 3 if those 2 are out together. And then we could also just count up how much green we have in our cost for permanence, and that's how much mana we're going to make. So we make a lot of mana. Panharmonicon for 4, if an artifact or creature entering the battlefield causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time. So that's in here for Altar of the Brood and Animation module. So every time a creature enters, Altar of the Brood is going to see it and cause a mill effect. Whenever a +1/+1 counter is put on a creature, Animation module sees it, and when it does, then it makes the token, and then we just keep doing that over and over again. So that's basically it. Trigon of Infestation for 4. Artifact enters the battlefield with 3 charge counters on it. Again, we proliferate, so that doesn't matter. For green tap, put a charge counter on Trigon of Infestation, or pay 2 and tap, remove a charge counter from Trigon of Infestation, put a 1/1 insect creature token with Infect on the battlefield. So Renata sees it, so now we have a 2/2 insect creature with Infect, and basically we're just going to try to keep making those. Now we don't have a way to copy them, but we will be trying to kill our opponent with Infect, and they'll never see it coming. Once we hit each of our opponents with Infect, we can use the Proliferate ability to kill them all. Most people don't like it, and when they see it, they usually freak out because they don't remember that Trigon of Infestation is a card, but let me tell you that it is extremely fun. Conjurer's Closet for 5, it's an artifact. At the beginning of your end step, you may exile target creature you control, then return that card to the battlefield under your control. So now what this is in here for is we can reset our creatures that have +1/+1 counters on them that we've been removing. So the Fertilid has 2. If we use 1, then it's a 1/1. So then we can use the Conjurer's Closet to pick it up, put it back down. It comes back in with 2 counters. We could also do that with the Spike Breeder or the Patron of Orochi. Well, we wouldn't want to do that because it would not get haste back. But basically, any one of them that's about to die because we've removed too many counters from it, we can reset it using Conjurer's Closet. The last thing we have is Contagion Engine for 6. It's an artifact. When it enters the battlefield, put a -1/-1 counter on each creature target player controls. Again, choose the player with the most creatures, put a -1/-1 counter on all their things, and as we're proliferating, we basically kill them. We killed all those creatures. And then for 4 tap, proliferate, then proliferate again. So you get to proliferate 2 times. Now, again, there's there's Rings of Bright Hearth. Because it's an activated ability, we get to pay 2, and then we get to proliferate 4 times. So it gets really annoying. And I bet that our opponent would not like that. So each one of them would get -4 each turn, because we're just going to keep doing that over and over again. And then also each of our creatures would get 4 +1/+1 counters on them. And then if they have Infect, then they'd get 4. So they'd try to remove Contagion Engine as fast as possible. Also, that combo works with Contagion Clasp as well, but it only proliferates the once. So if we have 12 mana, you tap the Contagion Clasp for the 4, pay the 2 to copy it, so now you proliferate twice, and then you pay the 4 for Contingent Engine, then you copy that and you proliferate 4 more times. So you're proliferating 6 times instead of 4. It's a lot. Next, Font of we're on enchantments now. Font of Fertility for 1 green. Enchantment, pay 1 and a green, sacrifice it, search your library for a basic land card, put it on the battlefield tap, then shuffle your library. So another good turn 1 play, get another get another forest on the battlefield, so it works. Cryptolith Rite is next. For 1 and a green, it has an enchantment. Creatures you control have tap, add 1 mana of any mana pool, of any color to your mana pool. So this is where Patron of Orochi comes into play. We tap all our creatures to add mana to our mana pool, and then we untap them using Patron of Orochi. And then if we need to do something huge with it, we can tap more, and so on and so forth. Durable Handcraft is next. For 1 and a green, enchantment. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, you may pay 1. If you do, put a +1/+1 counter on that creature. And for 5 and a green, sacrifice Durable Handcraft, a handicraft, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. So this and animation module trigger pretty well because we get to force that ability now. So whenever a creature enters, which again would be one of the tokens from Spike Breeder, it triggers Durable Handicraft since it entered the battlefield. We pay the 1, it gets a +1/+1 counter on it. Animation module sees that +1/+1 counter on it, and then we pay 1, and then we make a servo. Durable Handicraft sees the servo, pay 1, put a +1/+1 counter on that creature, and then we can do that until we run out of mana. Tap Patron of Orochi, untap all of our forests and our creatures, and then we just keep going. So we just make a giant army, and then again we're going to be proliferating as we go. Kalani Heart Expedition for 1 and a green. It's an enchantment. Whenever land enters the battlefield under your control, you may put a quest counter on Kalani Heart Expedition, then remove 3 quest counters from Kalani Heart Expedition and sacrifice it. Search your library for 2 basic land cards, put them on the battlefield tapped, then shuffle your library. So this is another ramp spell, so we have a lot of them. Again, we're trying to get all of the lands out of our deck, and then we'll be able to play all of our creatures, try to end the game fast as possible. Season of Growth for 1 and a green. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield, scry 1, and then whenever you cast a spell that targets a creature you control, draw a card. Now we don't care about the bottom part, but we do want to scry every time we play a creature, so this helps us out a lot. Hydra's Growth for 2 and a green. Enchant Aura, enchanted creature. When Hydra's Growth enters the battlefield, put a +1/+1 counter on enchanted creature, and then at the beginning of your upkeep, double the number of +1/+1 counters on enchanted creature. Now we're gonna put this on Yorvo, since Yorvo is gonna have the most +1/+1 counters on it, more than likely, and then every turn it's gonna double the +1/+1 counters on it. Now for this, we need Bramblewood Paragon out because we're gonna need to kill our opponents once we have this out, because our opponents start to get scared of this. Omen of the Hunt is next. For 2 and a green. You get an enchantment. Flash. When it enters the battlefield, you may search your library for a basic land card, put it on the battlefield tap, then shuffle your library, and then for 2 and a green, sacrifice it, scry 2. So we're going to need to get into our more expensive things pretty fast, so we're going to want to tap this pretty early to get that scry 2. Now we don't have a way to get it back from out of our graveyard, but that's okay, because the scry 2 is actually relatively important. Guardian Project is next. For 3 and a green, it's an enchantment. Whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, if it doesn't have the same name as another creature you control or a creature card in your graveyard, draw a card. Now that's pretty much impossible, seeing as this is Commander, unless you're playing in one of the cards that says you can have any number of these. But basically, every time we play one of our 23 creatures, we draw a card. And then it's when it enters the battlefield, so as Conjurer's Closet picks things up, puts them back down, Guardian Project will see that as well. We'll draw a card. Leyline of Abundance for 2 a green and a green. If Leyline of Abundance is in your opening hand, you may begin with it on the battlefield. Whenever you tap a creature for mana, add an additional green, and then for 6 a green and a green, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. So as you've seen, abilities like that, for me, are probably going to interact with something else. Leyline of Abundance and Cryptolith Rite together are relatively amazing, as it makes all of our creatures able to tap for mana, and then Leyline of Abundance says whenever they tap for mana, now we make an additional green. So basically they tap for 2. So each one of our creatures then becomes a mana dork, basically. And then that helps us out a lot because then we can make more mana than our opponents are expecting. We can play our other enchantments faster. Primitive Etchings is next for 2 green and a green. It's an enchantment. Reveal the first card you draw each turn. Whenever you reveal a creature card this way, draw a card. It's 23% creatures, so it's a possibility that it's not, but it just gives us a way to draw additional cards. Green isn't extremely good at that, so we just basically need to keep doing that over and over again. I think I forgot something. I see what I forgot. While I was mentioning Panharmonicon, I forgot to mention that Armorcraft Judge is the combo, the reason that's in there. So whenever it enters the battlefield, draw a card for each creature with a +1/+1 counter on it. Since almost all of our creatures are going to have +1/+1 counters on them, Panharmonicon sees that. We draw 2 cards for each creature we control. Also, with Conjurer's Closet, we can pick Armorcraft Judge up and put it back down, and then we draw that many cards at our end step. Now, I wouldn't really recommend that, seeing as since it's our end step, we're not going to be able to play them since we have nothing that gives flash, and Orrery is way too expensive to be able to play in 3DH, so you would basically just do that on our turn. But anyway, let's get back to the enchantments. We're on Vernal Bloom next for 3 and a green. It's an enchantment. Whenever a forest is tapped for a mana, its controller adds green to his or her mana pool. There's one more thing I needed to mention. For Leyline of Abundance, if we use... there we go. If we use Spike Tiller to make one of our lands a 2/2 creature, it counts as a land and as a creature, so we tap it for the green. It makes the additional green. And then for Vernal Bloom, it will also tap for the additional green. So each forest will be able to tap for 3, depending on how many of them are creatures. That's something I forgot. Vernal Bloom basically gives us additional mana if we're playing against other green forest decks. That doesn't matter. We need as much mana as we can, seeing as all of our creatures' abilities cost mana, and then we just want to make as many servos as possible. So we keep tapping all of our stuff for mana, and then use Patron of Rochi to untap it. So we just continuously get value for these kind of plays. 3 a green and a green. We have Perilous Forays for the next one. I didn't see this card until I was making this deck, so it's a discovery. For 1, sacrifice a creature, search your library for a land card with a basic land type and put it onto the play tapped, then shuffle your library. So again, since we're making tokens and we can tap our creatures for mana, we tap a creature that we're not going to use, we sacrifice it, we tap it for mana, sacrifice it, search for a basic land card, put on the battlefield. So, yeah, that's it's really good. More green decks that can make tokens, like elf decks, should play this. Yes, it's 5 mana, but we can make 5 mana easy. And then we have ways to make multiple tokens, so it's worth it. Zendikar's Resurgence is the last one for 5 a green and a green. It's an enchantment. Whenever you tap a land for mana, add 1 mana to your mana pool of any type that land produced. So since we're only making green, if we tap for green, it makes an additional green. Vernal Bloom triggers with this as well, so whenever we tap a forest, we'd be able to tap for 3 green. And then once we use the tiller and make one of the forests into a creature, Leyline of Abundance will trigger, so each land that's a creature will tap for 4 mana. So again, we're making lots of mana each turn. And then the last part of Zendikar's Resurgence is whenever you cast a creature spell, draw a card. There are lots of creature spells, so we'll be drawing lots of cards. So we're going to be able to overrun the board, and then we can pretty much recover from a board wipe as long as we have the ability to have 1 spike and animation module on, so we can remove a +1/+1 counter from the spike, put it somewhere, and then animation module trigger, put a +1/+1 play the get the token, and then put a +1/+1 counter on the token, seize it, animation module triggers, and then we'll just keep doing that over and over again. So that's another combo basically. Last but not least, there are 34 lands. As I said, there are 33 basic forests, and might I say that the full art ones from the new set are amazing. I love the constellation look. And the last one is Karn's Bastion. Karn's Bastion says, first off, it's a land. Tap, add colorless to your mana pool, or 4 and tap proliferate. So, Contingent Engine, Karn's Bastion, and Contingent Clasp are ways to proliferate for paying mana. And then also, just like Contingent Engine and Contingent Clasp, Karn's Bastion will also cause Rings of Bright Hearth to trigger, so then we can pay additionally and then proliferate more. So this deck is basically pretty fast for what it wants to do. It can reasonably kill within turn 6 or 7. For 3DH, that's really good. And then we can make relative lot amount of mana. And then I didn't mention the budget before, so we'll go over that now. We can get this deck for $2.90 online, or 2.9 ticks, or $157.12 in paper. Now, the reason the costs is so much in paper is because Rings of Bright Hearth is $44. So you could remove that and put another land in and get it for almost $100. Cryptolith Rite and Illusionist Bracers are also above the $4 mark, so Guardian Project is another one of those. It's expensive, but the rest of the cards pretty easy to come by. Protein Hulk, Patron of Orchi, and Spike Weaver are also above $5, but regardless, it's not hard to get this deck. There are many changes you can make to make it either faster or slower, depending on how much your budget is, and I'll be working on that later. But this, I forgot to mention, this is the green portion of the 32 challenge. So this is green, and then next video or next podcast will be the colorless version. And then thanks for joining. If you're a new listener, I appreciate it. This podcast is about 3DH Commander variant for MTG, played on Magic Online. I hope that you learned some new cards, because there are some that I have never seen before. And this was episode 11. Later.